I came to see my friend, but the moment I met his mom, everything I thought I knew about attraction changed. I arrived at my friend's house expecting the usual casual evening, laughs, video games, maybe some snacks. I wasn't prepared for the moment she appeared. His mother opened the door before I could knock properly, and I froze for a second. She wasn't just his mom, she carried a kind of effortless grace that made the room feel warmer the second she stepped into it. Her presence was calm yet magnetic, like sunlight spilling into a quiet room. She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that lingered, not forced, but deliberate, teasing in the smallest, almost imperceptible way. Her eyes, a deep warm brown, held a spark of amusement, as though she already knew more about me than I did myself. I felt a flutter in my chest that was confusing and oddly pleasant. "Hey," I managed, trying to sound casual as I handed over a small bag of snacks for my friend. Her gaze lingered for a beat longer than necessary, and I became suddenly aware of the faint scent of her perfume, a mix of lavender and something soft and warm, almost like vanilla. It settled into the room and, somehow, into my senses, leaving me feeling both nervous and strangely comfortable. She gestured for me to come in, and I noticed the small details that made her presence quietly commanding. The soft sway of her cardigan against her arm as she moved, the light catch of her earrings in the hallway light, the subtle way she leaned slightly forward as she spoke. Every movement felt natural, but I couldn't help noticing the way she carried herself, the gentle rhythm in her gestures that suggested confidence and warmth simultaneously. We exchanged small talk, my friend hadn't arrived yet, about mundane things, the weather, his school projects, nothing extraordinary. But there was a tension underlying her words, something playful in the way she tilted her head, letting her eyes meet mine a fraction longer than polite. It made me aware of the silence that hung between us at times, a silence that felt like it had its own gravity. She smirked as she handed me a drink, and I caught the faintest teasing in her expression, as though she was daring me to notice more than I should. My hand brushed hers briefly when taking the cup, and for a second, the warmth of her skin sent a strange, lingering awareness through me. I quickly pulled back, but the sensation didn't fade, it hovered, subtle yet persistent. I wasn't sure if it was curiosity, admiration, or something more complicated. I only knew that every glance, every movement, made my heart a little quicker, my thoughts a little muddier. I had come to see my friend, but suddenly, I couldn't stop noticing her, the way she spoke, the way she moved, the way she smiled with a quiet confidence that made everything else in the room fade slightly into the background. And then, just before I could settle my thoughts, she smirked again, a playful glint in her eye, and whispered almost to herself, "You came for him, but I wonder if you'll stay for me." I froze, unsure if she meant it seriously or if it was a tease. But in that instant, I realized this visit wouldn't be ordinary. Something about her had already unsettled me in the most intoxicating way. And I wasn't sure I wanted to leave. After that first encounter, every visit to my friend's house started to feel different. It wasn't that he had changed, or that anything obvious had shifted, but her presence lingered in my mind in a way I hadn't expected. Even before the door opened, I could feel a quiet anticipation, a mix of curiosity and something heavier, unspoken, drawing me toward her. The first few times I noticed it, it was small, almost incidental. She would hand me a mug of tea, her fingers brushing mine for just a moment longer than necessary. The warmth of her hand spread through me in a way that was hard to ignore. I tried to focus on my friend, to keep my attention on casual conversation, but I couldn't help sneaking glances at her. How she moved around the kitchen, the way her cardigan fell softly against her arms, the way her hair caught the light when she tucked it behind her ear. Everything about her seemed effortless, yet it pulled at me in ways I didn't fully understand. One afternoon, we ended up in the living room, and she sat on the couch beside me to chat while my friend stepped away. Her presence was close but not invasive, the kind of nearness that makes you hyper-aware of every small movement. She laughed at something I said, a warm, low sound that seemed to resonate in my chest. I noticed how the couch cushions shifted slightly under her weight, how her arm brushed mine when she adjusted her position. The sensation of her closeness, soft, subtle, but undeniably present, made my pulse quicken. She had a way of looking at me that was both teasing and knowing. I could feel it in the tilt of her head, the way her lips curved into that quiet smirk that had unsettled me on the first visit. Sometimes, I'd catch her glancing in my direction when she thought I wasn't looking, and the slight lift of her eyebrow felt like a private joke I wasn't sure I was ready to understand. Even the smallest gestures had meaning. When she offered me snacks, her fingers lightly brushed mine as I took them. When she walked past me, I could feel the warmth of her body radiating just enough to make me aware of her. And every time she laughed or smiled, the sound seemed to linger in the room longer than it should, like it was meant just for me. I found myself thinking about her in moments when I shouldn't, while walking home, while scrolling through my phone, during quiet study sessions. I'd replay those glances, that brief contact, the gentle teasing of her voice. I wasn't just noticing her anymore, I was aware of the pull she had on me, subtle but insistent, like a gentle current I couldn't resist. And then, during one of those visits, she leaned slightly closer when handing me a drink, her hand brushing mine in a way that lingered just a second too long. I felt the warmth of her skin, the soft pressure of her palm, and the quiet electricity of proximity. She didn't say anything, just let her gaze meet mine, soft yet pointed, and smiled knowingly. In that moment, I realized I wasn't here for my friend anymore, not entirely. Something about her, the calm confidence, the playful smirk, the way she seemed to notice everything about me, was quietly unraveling the boundaries I'd thought were solid. And I didn't mind. It happened one quiet evening. My friend had stepped out for a quick errand, leaving the two of us alone in the living room. The atmosphere felt different this time, calmer, almost intimate in a way I couldn't fully name. She sat across from me, a soft lamp casting warm shadows over her face, highlighting the gentle curve of her smile and the faint lines at the corners of her eyes that only made her more compelling. We started talking about nothing at first, the usual topics of school, plans for the weekend, but soon the conversation drifted. She began to share small, personal stories about her younger years, memories of mistakes, and moments of quiet triumph that she rarely mentioned aloud. I listened intently, realizing that the warmth and humor in her voice were paired with a depth I hadn't expected. Her eyes softened when she spoke, and I could see the vulnerability beneath her confident exterior. At one point, she paused, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. In that motion, her hand lightly touched mine resting on the arm of the chair. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a subtle jolt through me, a mix of awareness and something I wasn't ready to label. I pulled my hand back slightly, though reluctantly, and she noticed. There was no teasing this time, just a quiet, knowing smile, almost as if she understood the effect she had on me without needing to speak. Her laughter, low and melodic, filled the room when I shared a self-deprecating joke, and for a moment, the space between us felt smaller. I could feel the warmth of her presence, the subtle movement of her body as she shifted in her seat, and it was intoxicating in a way that left me both exhilarated and cautious. Every glance, every gesture, felt loaded with meaning I wasn't entirely sure I should be interpreting. When our eyes met, there was a pause, a silence that carried weight. In that pause, I realized how much I was drawn to her, not just by her beauty, but by the authenticity she exuded. The gentle tilt of her head, the soft curve of her lips, the way her fingers played with the edge of her sleeve, all of it made me keenly aware of the quiet connection forming between us. I wanted to say something, anything, to acknowledge it, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I let the silence speak, letting her stories fill the space between us, letting her presence sink in. And she noticed, I think, because she reached out, ever so slightly, and rested her hand near mine. Not pressing, not demanding, just close enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. It was the first time I realized that our connection went beyond casual familiarity. There was a subtle tension, yes, but also a comforting intimacy, as if we were sharing something private in a space that didn't belong to anyone else. I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear, the thrill of forbidden curiosity mingling with the respect I had for the boundaries that existed. That night, as I left, her smile lingered in my mind, soft and knowing, and I knew that the pull I felt toward her wasn't going to fade anytime soon. Something had shifted between us, quietly, subtly, but undeniably. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the thoughts that had been planted during that quiet evening. Every memory of her smile, the warmth of her hand, the way her presence seemed to fill the room, replayed in my mind like a loop I couldn't escape. I knew it was wrong, impossible, even. She was my friend's mother, someone I should only see as off-limits, someone who existed in the background of my life until now. And yet, the pull I felt was undeniable. When I returned to their house, I was hyper-aware of her. Even simple actions, her passing by to adjust a picture frame, her laughter drifting from the kitchen, felt charged. I caught myself overanalyzing every glance she threw my way, every accidental brush of our hands. My thoughts swung between exhilaration and guilt, between desire and propriety. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, teetering between curiosity and conscience, and I wasn't sure how long I could balance it. She noticed, of course. There was a subtle shift in her behavior, nothing overt, nothing that would alarm an outsider, but a gentle teasing in her voice when we spoke, a slight linger of her gaze when she passed by. One afternoon, as I reached for a book she had been holding, our fingers brushed. I pulled back instinctively, and she simply tilted her head, a small, knowing smile tugging at her lips. Her expression was calm, almost amused, as if she were fully aware of the storm of hesitation and longing brewing within me. That smile, though subtle, ignited something I wasn't prepared for. My chest tightened, my heart quickened, and I realized how acutely aware I had become of her warmth, her laughter, her voice. And yet, alongside that thrill was a nagging tension, the voice in my head warning me of boundaries, of consequences, of the social line I wasn't supposed to cross. It made me feel like an intruder in my own emotions, caught between fascination and restraint. Even small touches carried weight. The way she reached over to straighten my sleeve, the light brush of her hand when she handed me a mug, the way her hair occasionally grazed my arm, all of it felt charged with intention, and yet, perfectly subtle. I found myself questioning every moment, did she notice the effect she had on me, or was I reading too much into it? Was this playful teasing, or something more profound? I tried to focus on my friend, to anchor myself in normalcy, but my mind kept returning to her, the quiet strength in her eyes, the warmth of her presence, the gentle, teasing way she seemed to acknowledge my hesitation without ever crossing the line. It was frustrating, intoxicating, and confusing all at once. By the time I left that day, I felt a strange mix of relief and longing. Relief, because I had maintained some semblance of propriety, longing, because every moment with her left me wanting more, even as I knew I shouldn't. The line between curiosity and desire was blurring, and I realized I was trapped in the slow pull of something I didn't fully understand, but couldn't ignore. The next visit felt different from the moment I stepped inside. It was as if the air itself had shifted, charged with an unspoken awareness. My friend was distracted by a phone call, leaving me alone with her in the living room, and I could feel the weight of her gaze before I even realized it. She was sitting on the edge of the couch, her posture relaxed yet deliberate, the light from the window catching the soft waves of her hair. "Careful," she said with a teasing lilt as I reached for a snack she had placed on the table. Her hand brushed mine lightly, intentionally, or maybe not, but the effect was immediate. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened. I quickly pulled back, trying to act casual, but the warmth of her touch lingered in a way that made casual conversation suddenly difficult. She leaned slightly closer when we laughed at the same joke, her elbow grazing mine. It was a small contact, almost accidental, yet it sent a spark of awareness through me. Every subtle gesture felt loaded, the way she tilted her head while speaking, the playful glint in her eyes, the way her lips curved when she smiled. It was impossible not to notice, impossible not to feel the quiet tension that existed between us, a tension neither of us fully acknowledged but that neither could ignore. She moved around the room with an effortless grace, adjusting cushions, tidying the table, and each movement drew my attention inescapably. When she passed behind me to reach for something, I felt the warmth of her body as she came near, the faint brush of her sweater against my shoulder. It was subtle, teasing, deliberate, or perhaps perfectly accidental, but it left me breathless in a way I couldn't explain. Her laughter filled the room at some point, soft and melodic, and I found myself leaning slightly toward her, drawn into the sound. The playful smirk she gave me afterward was knowing, as if she understood the effect she had on me, and perhaps enjoyed it more than she let on. Every glance, every soft word, every fleeting touch made me acutely aware of her presence and my own inability to maintain emotional distance. And then, during a pause in our conversation, she leaned closer just slightly, enough that the warmth of her arm brushed mine again. I felt a jolt of electricity, a mix of exhilaration and hesitation. I caught myself staring at her eyes, drawn to their warmth, their depth, their playful intelligence. My mind told me to step back, to respect boundaries, but my body refused, pulled by something subtle, magnetic, and impossible to articulate. By the time my friend returned, I was acutely aware of the shift. The quiet tension between us hadn't dissipated, if anything, it had intensified. She smiled at me, that same smirk tugging at her lips, and I realized she knew exactly how close I was to crossing the line, emotionally, at least. And yet, nothing inappropriate happened. It was a dance of glances, of subtle touches, of teasing proximity that left my mind buzzing long after I left the house. I had come for my friend, but it was clear I wasn't the only one feeling the pull. Every small movement, every playful tease, every deliberate glance from her made me understand that our connection had deepened. I wasn't just noticing her anymore, I was drawn to her in a way that was impossible to ignore, and I had no idea where this slow-burn tension would take us next. It happened one quiet evening, the kind of evening that feels suspended in time. My friend had gone out, leaving the two of us alone again, and this time the atmosphere carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. The room felt smaller somehow, more intimate. The warm glow of the lamp softened the shadows, highlighting the gentle lines of her face, the curve of her smile, the calm confidence that had always drawn me in. We started talking casually, as we always did, but soon our words began to dig deeper, moving beyond superficial chatter. She shared a story from her past, a memory tinged with vulnerability, one she rarely mentioned aloud. I listened, captivated not only by her words but by the emotion behind them. There was a quiet honesty in the way she spoke, a kind of openness that invited trust. I realized, with a mixture of awe and nervousness, that she was allowing me into a part of her world that few people ever saw. Without thinking, I responded with equal honesty, telling her something I hadn't shared with anyone else. My voice was low, cautious, but sincere. For a moment, silence fell between us, not uncomfortable, but charged. I could feel her presence closer now, almost tangible, as if the space between us was electric. Her eyes softened, and she gave me a small, approving smile that made my chest ache with warmth. Then, almost instinctively, she reached out. Her hand rested lightly on my shoulder, not pressing, not demanding, just there. The warmth of her skin, the gentle steadiness of her touch, made my heart beat faster. I wanted to pull away, to remind myself of boundaries, but instead I let myself feel the connection, letting the unspoken understanding pass between us. It was a touch that said more than words could, acknowledging what we both felt without needing to say it aloud. Her gaze met mine, steady and knowing, and I felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. I realized that she wasn't just aware of the pull between us, she was inviting it, subtle and careful, with a tenderness that made the tension between us feel safe rather than dangerous. I found myself leaning in slightly, drawn to the warmth of her presence, the quiet depth in her eyes, the honesty that seemed to radiate from her every movement. We shared a laugh at something trivial, but even then, it carried weight. There was a softness in her expression, a gentle acknowledgement that we were treading into something unspoken but profoundly felt. Every glance, every slight movement, every quiet smile was a conversation in itself, a silent exchange of understanding and curiosity. As the evening wore on, I realized something crucial: the connection we shared wasn't fleeting. It wasn't just curiosity or desire, it was a quiet, growing intimacy, built on trust, subtle affection, and emotional vulnerability. In that small living room, under the soft glow of the lamp, I finally understood that the pull I had felt since the first visit was mutual. She felt it too, and she was letting me know, softly, carefully, in ways words could never fully capture. When I finally left, her hand lingered for a moment as we said goodbye, and her eyes held a warmth that promised understanding, connection, and a slow-burning intimacy that neither of us could deny. The evening felt unusually serene as I arrived at my friend's house for what I knew might be the last long visit for a while. The sky was painted with the soft orange and pink hues of sunset, casting a warm glow through the living room windows. Everything about the moment felt suspended in time, as if the world had slowed to let us exist quietly in this space together. She greeted me with that familiar, confident smile, the one that had drawn me in from the very first visit. But tonight, there was something softer in her expression, a warmth that hadn't been as visible before. We exchanged the usual small talk, but beneath it flowed the subtle awareness that had built over weeks of stolen glances, lingering touches, and quiet conversations. We ended up sitting close on the couch, our knees almost brushing. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the evening outside, yet the silence between us was comfortable, intimate even. She reached for a throw blanket and draped it lightly over both of our laps, her fingers brushing mine just enough to send a shiver up my spine. I wanted to pull away out of habit, to maintain some boundary, but I didn't. Instead, I let the warmth of her hand linger against mine, feeling the subtle steady rhythm of her presence. We talked about everything and nothing, books, movies, memories, dreams. Each word carried a weight, each pause a conversation in itself. Her laughter came softly, filling the room with warmth, and I felt the pull of connection tighten, as if every shared moment had built to this quiet, unspoken understanding. She tilted her head slightly, letting her hair brush my arm as she leaned in to emphasize a point, and I realized I was holding my breath, aware of every small movement, every subtle gesture. Then, in a moment that felt both fleeting and infinite, she rested her hand lightly on my shoulder. It wasn't bold or demanding, it was gentle, reassuring, intentional. I felt the warmth of her skin, the quiet steadiness of her touch, and I understood fully the depth of the connection we had forged. There was no need for words, the intimacy was in the shared glances, the soft smiles, the understanding that existed between us. Before I left, she leaned slightly closer, brushing her cheek against mine in a fleeting, tender gesture. Her eyes met mine, warm and playful, and that familiar smirk tugged at her lips, suggesting all the unspoken promises we had built over our time together. I felt a rush of warmth and contentment, a sense of completion tempered by the lingering thrill of our slow-burn connection. As I stepped out into the evening, the golden light of the sunset casting long shadows on the pavement, I carried with me the memory of her presence, the soft warmth of her touch, the quiet depth in her eyes, the gentle smirk that had lingered since the very beginning. I had come for my friend, yes, but I left knowing something far more meaningful. The connection we had shared was real, tender, and profound, and it would stay with me long after the door closed behind me. That evening, the tension that had pulled and teased for weeks settled into something enduring, something beautifully human. There was no rush, no leap into the unknown, just the quiet, steady satisfaction of a bond forged slowly, carefully, and entirely worth savoring. If you enjoyed this slow burn story, don't forget to hit follow and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.